She was a poor maid. She cleaned their floors. She washed their dishes. She pressed their linens and served their dinner and kept her eyes down while they looked through her like she wasn't standing right in front of them. She had no money, no power, no last name that meant anything to anyone in that house. And they knew it. That's exactly why they chose her. Because when a family as ruthless as the Blackwells needed someone to marry their billionaire heir, a man lying unconscious in a hospital bed, hooked to machines, unable to speak, unable to fight back, unable to say no, they didn't go looking for an equal. They went looking for someone they could use, someone they could discard, someone who had no choice. They stood in front of Clara Monroe with her mother's medical bills in one hand and a marriage certificate in the other, and they told her to sign. So she signed. She married a billionaire heir in a coma, a man she had never spoken to, a man who didn't even know she existed, while his family watched with cold eyes and colder smiles, already planning what they would take from him next. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. They thought she was exactly what she looked like, a poor maid with no options and no future and nothing left to lose. They were wrong about every single thing. Because what they didn't know, what nobody in that house knew, was that Clara Monroe had not come there by accident. She had come there with a plan. And the man in that hospital bed, he wasn't as far gone as they believed. He could hear everything. And the moment he woke up, the moment his eyes opened, and the truth of what had been done to him, to her, and to her family came flooding into the light, the Blackwells would discover that the poor maid they forced, manipulated, and humiliated wasn't just a woman who survived their cruelty. She was the one person on earth with every reason, and now every power, to make them pay for it. But here is what nobody tells you about a story like this. Did she marry him to save herself, or had she already been saving him all along? When he woke up and learned the truth, would he see a woman who was forced into his life, or the only person who had chosen to stay in it? And when he married her against all odds, against his own mother, against public humiliation, against everyone who said she wasn't enough, was it love? Or was it something deeper than love? A man finally choosing, with his eyes wide open, the one person they all tried to make him overlook. Stay with us, because this story doesn't just have a twist. It has a reckoning. The Blackwell estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, sat behind iron gates on 14 acres of manicured grounds, and it looked exactly like what it was, the physical evidence of a family that had accumulated so much power for so long that they had stopped questioning whether they deserved it. The main house had 42 rooms, ceilings that reached 20 feet in the grand foyer, and a marble staircase imported from a demolished Italian palazzo in 1987. There were 3 full-time chefs, a groundskeeping staff of 6, and a household staff of 11, not counting the security detail that operated from a converted carriage house near the rear gate. Clara Monroe had been one of those 11 for exactly 8 months. Every morning at 5:45 a.m., she tied her dark hair back, pulled on her gray uniform, and began polishing floors that were already spotless. She did it without complaint. She did it without drawing attention. She moved through the Blackwell estate the way water moves through a crack in stone, quietly, patiently, finding every opening. Because that was exactly what she was doing, finding openings. 12 years before she ever set foot in this house, Clara had sat on the floor of a 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport with a cardboard box between her knees, going through her dead father's papers. She was 12 years old. Her mother, Grace, sat in the kitchen not eating. The apartment smelled like sympathy casserole from neighbors and something older underneath, the particular scent of a household where money had been absent for a long time. James Monroe had died of a heart attack at 41 years old, and the coroner's report was clean and uncomplicated. But the box of papers Clara sat with told a different story. She found the original founding documents of Blackwell Monroe Industries. She found correspondence between her father and Victor Blackwell spanning 8 years of partnership. She found, tucked at the very bottom beneath a rubber band gone brittle with age, a single handwritten note in her father's script. It said, "They took everything, Clara Bug. But the truth is in file 4471B. Someday someone will find it. I pray it's you." She was 12. She didn't know what 4471B meant, but she folded the note and put it in her pocket and kept it there until the pocket wore through, and then she kept it in her mind instead. She won a full scholarship to Harvard. She studied finance and corporate law with the focused precision of someone building a weapon. She graduated, turned down 3 firm offers, and spent 2 years researching exactly where the original documents of case 4471B had gone. The answer, after 22 months of careful digging, was the Blackwell estate's private archive, which meant she needed to get inside. So Clara Monroe applied for a position as a household maid, accepted the wage without negotiation, and began polishing floors that were already spotless. "Monroe," said Rosa, the 70-year-old cook who had worked in the house since before Ethan Blackwell was born, on Clara's first morning. Rosa handed her a mop and looked at her the way experienced women look at younger ones carrying invisible weight. "You keep your head down in this house. You hear things. You see things. You forget them immediately." "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. Rosa watched her for a moment longer, her dark eyes moving over Clara's face with the particular attentiveness of a woman who had spent decades reading rooms. Something she saw there made her pause. Then she turned back to her stove. "Good," she said simply. It was the beginning of the only friendship Clara would make in that house. She didn't know yet how much she would need it. The Blackwells lived the way very old money lives, not loudly, but absolutely. There was no performance of wealth in the Blackwell house because there had never been any need to perform it. The performance was for people who feared losing what they had. The Blackwells had never feared anything. Margaret Blackwell was 61 years old and had been the commanding presence in this house for 34 years. She wore Chanel on weekdays and reserved her jewelry for evenings, but there was no version of Margaret that was understated. She moved through rooms like legislation, purposeful, precedent-setting, and unapologetically final. She had never once, in the 8 months Clara had worked in this house, made eye contact with a member of the household staff. They were furniture to her. Expensive, functional furniture that she expected to work without drawing attention to itself. Her husband Victor Blackwell had once been the most powerful man in the room at any gathering in Connecticut's financial circles. At 71, Parkinson's disease had reduced him to something diminished and trembling, though on his clearer days a ghost of the man he'd been rose up through the tremors, sharp-eyed, restless, and weighted with something that looked, to anyone paying careful attention, like guilt that had never found its confession. He spent most afternoons in his study on the second floor, surrounded by 40 years of business records, as though proximity to the evidence of his life's work could make him feel that the costs of building it had been worth paying. Nathaniel Blackwell, Nate, was Victor's nephew, 32 years old and raised inside the estate's wealth without inheriting any of its formal authority. That omission had shaped him the way a stone shapes a river. He moved around it constantly, finding other channels. He was broad-shouldered and easy-smiling in the particular way of men who have learned that charm is more efficient than honesty. And his charm was very good, good enough that most people didn't notice the flatness in his eyes until they'd already said more than they intended to. He drove a midnight blue Porsche that he parked across 2 spaces and had never once, in Clara's observation, thanked anyone who worked in the house for anything. Diana Caldwell was Ethan's fiancée, or had been, until his accident changed the math of their relationship in ways she hadn't bothered to disguise. She came from Connecticut banking money, the kind of woman who had been groomed for a house like this one since childhood. And she arrived twice a week in a cream-colored Range Rover and ate half her food, and left the rest on expensive plates with the careless ease of someone who had never once considered that waste was a choice. She and Nate had begun arriving together 3 weeks after Ethan's accident. Neither of them acknowledged this shift publicly. Neither of them needed to. And then there was Ethan. Clara had only ever seen photographs of him before his accident. In photographs, Ethan Blackwell looked like what the financial press said he was: 31 years old, Yale-educated, quietly transforming his father's aging infrastructure company into something leaner and considerably more dangerous to its competitors. He had his mother's jawline and his father's eyes, and there was something in the set of his expression in every photograph, some quality of genuine attentiveness, that Clara had noticed and filed away without letting herself think too carefully about what it meant. She had not come to this house to think about Ethan Blackwell as a person. But the photographs, she would later understand, had not captured the most important thing about him. That would require being in the same room. Clara found him on a Thursday evening in the East Library. She was not supposed to be in the East Library at that hour, but she had discovered 3 weeks earlier that the accounting ledgers on the Northwest shelf, spanning 1999 through 2003, the precise years of her father's forced exit from the company, were accessible on Thursday evenings when the library sat empty between 6 and 8. She had been photographing them in careful, systematic sequence, one shelf at a time, always replacing everything exactly as she found it. She was reaching for the third ledger from the left when she heard the door. She shoved the ledger back, grabbed a duster from her cart, turned. Ethan Blackwell walked in, still wearing a travel coat damp from outside, carrying nothing but his phone and the particular exhaustion of a man who had taken one too many red-eye flights for one too many quarters in a row. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes moved to her, to the cart, to the accounting ledger sitting a half-inch out of alignment on the shelf, and then back to her. Clara's heart did not stop, because she had trained herself out of reactions like that, but it came close. Ethan crossed to the shelf. He slid the ledger back into perfect alignment. Then he turned and looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who saw considerably more than he indicated. "The filing system in here is a nightmare," he said. "Don't let my mother catch you near her father's archive. A beat. Some of those records are older than both of us." He walked out. Clara stood in the library for a very long time after his footsteps faded. He had seen. He had understood at least the surface of what he was seeing, and he had said nothing except a warning delivered in the tone of someone who did not think she deserved to be in trouble for it. She picked up the ledger, set it down, picked it up again. She thought about that for 3 days. Then she watched him hold the service door open for Rosa on a Sunday morning, not the door from the main hall that family members used, but the kitchen door, the staff door, the one the Blackwells didn't technically use at all, and she watched Rosa look up at him with the expression of a woman who had served this family for 30 years and been surprised by it for the first time. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan," Rosa said, and Ethan said, "Thank you for the coffee, Rosa." It was better than London's, and walked out into the frost. Margaret, who had observed this from the top of the stairs, made a sound so quiet it was barely sound at all, a compression of disapproval so habitual it had lost its syllables. And then at dinner that Saturday, Nate Caldwell said something to Diana that was technically a compliment and specifically a diminishment, and the table laughed the polite laugh of people who recognize cruelty dressed in a dinner jacket. Ethan set his fork down. "That's enough, Nate," he said, quietly and without emphasis, the way people say things they have said before and mean every time. The table went still. Nate smiled and changed the subject. But his eyes, crossing the table to Ethan's face, were flat and ancient and patient in the way of a man waiting for something he has been waiting for a long time. Clara, clearing the salad plates, catalogued all 3 moments and said nothing to anyone. She was beginning to understand that Ethan Blackwell was not his family, and she was beginning to understand that this was going to make everything considerably more complicated. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. Clara heard it through the wall of her room above the servants' quarters, Margaret's voice, lower than usual, stripped of its characteristic precision by something that sounded almost like shock before it reassembled itself into control. She pressed her ear to the wall and caught fragments. Westchester County, Mountain Road, brake failure. Then Margaret's voice sharpened into the register she used for managing situations rather than feeling them, and Clara heard no more. She found out the rest the way the staff always found out things, through Rosa, who had found out through the night security team, who had found out through the police scanner they kept running in the carriage house. Ethan Blackwell's car had gone off a mountain road at 11:14 p.m. He had been airlifted to Greenwich Medical. He was alive. He was unconscious. The prognosis was uncertain. 2 days after the accident, Clara was carrying a tray of coffee through the back corridor when she passed the east terrace. The terrace doors were cracked. Nate stood outside with his back to the house and his phone pressed to his ear, his voice pitched below the wind but not below Clara's hearing. "It's done," he said, "but it needs to look clean. I don't want his people asking questions about the brake line." A pause, during which the person on the other end said something Clara couldn't catch. "Then handle it," Nate said and hung up. Clara walked on without breaking stride. She set the coffee tray down in the parlor. She went to the bathroom down the hall and ran cold water over her wrists for 45 seconds. Then she went back to work. She had no proof. She had a fragment of a conversation in the wind. She had Nate's flat, patient eyes across a dinner table. She filed it all in the place where she kept things that were not yet ready to be used, and she waited. But she also, starting that evening, began going to the hospital. Not obviously. She arranged it around her days off, Tuesdays and every other Sunday. She told Rosa she was visiting her mother. She was, sometimes, on the way. But she always went to Greenwich Medical first, and she always stopped outside room 412, and she always looked through the narrow window in the door at the man lying in the bed, with the monitors blinking around him like a quiet argument for his continued existence. She did not go in. Not yet. She was still telling herself it was professional. She needed to understand the timeline, needed to know if he would recover before certain decisions needed to be made. That was what she told herself. But on the third visit, she stood at that window for 14 minutes, which was 10 minutes longer than a professional assessment required. She went back to the estate and cleaned the floors and said nothing. Margaret Blackwell summoned Clara to her private office on a Monday morning 8 days after the accident. The office was a room Clara had memorized from the outside and never entered. A corner suite on the main floor with 2 locked filing cabinets she had tried and failed to access, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a desk the color and approximate weight of authority. Margaret was seated behind it when Clara entered, and she did not invite her to sit. On the desk, positioned with the deliberate geometry of a woman who arranged rooms the way chess players arranged boards, sat 3 objects. A hospital invoice, $219,000, Grace Monroe's outstanding medical balance, highlighted in yellow. A stack of legal documents, and a document Clara recognized at the bottom of the pile by its header font alone, because she had been looking for that font for 3 years. The fraudulent share transfer, the document that had ended her father's life. "Your mother's supplemental treatment will be discontinued at the end of this month," Margaret said, not looking up from her folded hands. "The arrangement we had was informal. Informal arrangements can end at any time." Clara stood still. What Margaret didn't know, and what Clara had never told anyone, was that the medical coverage attached to her position at the estate had been the reason she could afford to work for a maid's wage in the first place. Her Harvard law contacts had been expensive. The investigation had taken savings. The maid's salary alone would never have covered Grace Monroe's care. Margaret had been, unwittingly, subsidizing the investigation that was going to dismantle her family, and she had just revealed that she knew it. "I believe you've been looking for something like this," Margaret said, sliding the share transfer document forward. Clara's eyes moved across it, her father's signature or something engineered to look like it at the bottom. "I'll make you a straightforward proposal, My son requires a wife. Victor's estate documents require that Ethan be married before his 29th birthday or primary control of the Blackwell estate passes to a charitable foundation. She said charitable foundation with the tone of someone numbing a disease. His birthday is in 21 days. Diana has decided her future doesn't include a man who may never regain consciousness. I need someone manageable, someone who understands their position. She looked at Clara with the clean, uncomplicated certainty of a woman who had never once considered she might be outmatched by someone in a gray uniform. You will marry Ethan. You will sign what you're told. You will be compensated for your mother's bills. And when the arrangement concludes, you will receive this document and a signed statement that your father's file has been reviewed. And if I refuse, Clara said. Margaret opened a third folder. Inside, a photograph of Clara in the East Library photographing a ledger. Theft of confidential documents. I have 3 witnesses on staff. I would hate to have you arrested, given your mother's condition. Clara looked at the share transfer one more time. In the bottom corner, nearly invisible, was a reference stamp. Case 4471 be her father's case, the spine of everything. I'll need to see my mother first, Clara said. Margaret was already reaching for her phone, already moving on, already certain. What she did not see, because she was looking at her screen and not at a maid she considered beneath sustained attention, was Clara's hand sliding the share transfer 3 inches toward the window, where afternoon light fell across it at a new angle, and the faint click of a camera. Of course, Margaret said, be back by evening. Clara walked out with the photograph on her phone, and her father's case number memorized in her chest like a second heartbeat. The ceremony took 9 minutes. A judge, an associate of Margaret's from the Greenwich County Circuit, a man who owed the Blackwell family 2 favors and a judicial appointment, read the legal language in the Blackwell estate's main library. The room had been chosen for its size and its distance from the street, not for any sentimental reason. There were no flowers. There was no music. The furniture had been pushed to the walls, and Ethan's hospital bed had been transported and positioned near the cold fireplace, his monitors running on portable power, the quiet rhythmic beeping of his vitals the only sound in the room beside the judge's voice. Nate stood to the left with his arms loosely crossed, wearing the expression of a man watching a financial instrument being correctly filed. He had dressed for dinner rather than a wedding, which said everything about what he thought this was. Diana Caldwell was not present. She was in Nate's Hampton Beach house, and her social media showed a sunset she had not bothered to delay posting. Clara stood at the foot of Ethan's bed in her gray maid's uniform, because Margaret had not offered her anything else and she had not asked. Later, she would think about that choice, Margaret's choice to let her marry a billionaire in a servant's uniform, and understand it as the most precise summary of what the Blackwell family believed about her. That she could be used and dressed as what she was being used as simultaneously. She looked at Ethan while the judge read. His face was still. His chest rose and fell with assisted steadiness. He looked younger without the alert purposefulness that animated him in photographs, and in that brief library encounter, he looked, without the performance of consciousness, like someone who had been kind before the world taught him to be careful. The judge asked her to sign. She signed, Clara Elizabeth Monroe, Mrs. Ethan James Blackwell. The judge left. Harold Simmons, Margaret's lawyer, who had driven to the estate and was now driving away with something in his expression that was not satisfaction, left without speaking to anyone. Margaret left. Nate lingered in the doorway. He studied Clara the way you study something you've purchased to confirm it's what you needed. Don't get comfortable, he said pleasantly, and followed his aunt out. Clara was alone with Ethan. She stood at the foot of his bed for a long time. Then she moved to the chair beside him and sat. She leaned forward and she said, very quietly, the thing she had no audience for and no reason to say except that the silence of the room seemed to require honesty. "I'm sorry. I didn't choose this any more than you did, but I promise you something, I will not let them use me to hurt you." She didn't know that in the upper corner of the library, mounted high on the bookshelf, where the cameras were positioned for security coverage, a small red light blinked once. Someone was watching. On the third floor of the Blackwell estate, in a darkened office, Nate Blackwell rewound the security footage and watched Clara lean over his unconscious cousin and speak. He couldn't hear the audio. He watched her face instead, and what he saw there, not grief, not performance, but something still and serious and genuine, made him pick up his phone with an expression that had lost its pleasantness entirely. "It's done," he said, "but she's not what we thought." He didn't know yet how right he was. The morning after the wedding, Clara reported for her usual duties at 5:45 a.m. Rosa watched her come down the back stairs in her gray uniform, mop in hand, with the expression of a woman who had seen things in this house that she had spent 30 years carefully not reacting to. "You don't have to do that anymore," Rosa whispered, casting a glance toward the main corridor. "You're Clara, you're—" "I'm doing my job," Clara said quietly. "Nothing has changed, Rosa, please." Rosa looked at her for a moment. She understood the kind of intelligence that knows when to be invisible. She handed Clara the mop and went back to her stove. What followed was 5 weeks of the most precisely engineered humiliation Clara had ever experienced, and she had grown up in a Bridgeport apartment going through a dead man's boxes, so her baseline was not low. Margaret never announced the marriage to the household staff. Clara continued appearing on the monthly payroll as she always had third-tier domestic staff hourly. She received no new title, no change in accommodation, no acknowledgement of any change in her status. When the estate accountant processed wages, Clara Monroe appeared between the gardening crew and the laundry service, not in any column marked family. 3 weeks after the wedding, Margaret hosted a dinner for 12 of Greenwich's most prominent families. Clara served the appetizers in her gray uniform, carrying a silver tray between women in Valentino and men in watches that cost more than her mother's yearly care. A woman named Catherine Hargrove, old Greenwich money, pearls at her throat, the permanent expression of someone who believed that most people were happening to her, stopped Clara as she passed. "You're new," Catherine said. "What happened to the other girl?" "She moved on," Clara said. Catherine turned to Margaret across the table. "These girls never last." Margaret smiled with the serenity of a woman who controlled every variable in the room. "No," she said, "they rarely do." Then Diana Caldwell, seated beside Nate, her hand resting on his arm with the comfortable ease of months, not weeks, turned in her chair as Clara passed and pivoted without warning. The full glass of Bordeaux in her hand went across Clara's uniform, dark red against pale gray. The table went quiet in the specific way of people who have witnessed something and are deciding whether they saw it. "Oh no," Diana said, flat, no performance of apology. She looked at the spreading stain and then at Clara's face with the focused attention of someone delivering a message rather than making an error. "You should probably go change." "Oh, but I suppose you don't have anything else to wear, do you? All your things are in the servants' quarters." Several guests examined their bread plates with sudden intensity. Nate made a sound that was almost a laugh. Clara looked at Diana. She did not flinch. She did not color. She said, with absolute calm that cost her more than anyone in that room would ever know, "I'll send you the dry cleaning bill." She picked up the empty tray and walked back toward the kitchen. Behind the closed door, she stood at the sink and ran cold water until her hands stopped shaking. Rosa put a hand on her shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly right. Clara looked up. Her eyes were dry. "She's afraid of me," she said quietly. "She just doesn't know why yet." Dr. Patricia Hughes had been Ethan Blackwell's neurologist for 11 years, and she was constitutionally incapable of ignoring things that didn't add up. She was 53 years old and had built her career on the precise, unglamorous discipline of reading what the brain was doing when everything else said nothing was happening. She had been a quiet, methodical presence in Ethan's case since the first night, monitoring his activity, tracking his recovery indicators, expecting the slow but ultimately upward arc that his initial scans had suggested was probable. By week 8, the arc had stopped. Not declined, not progressed, stopped, and stopped in a way that her 26 years of neurology practice told her brains did not simply do on their own. His activity was consistent with someone approaching wakefulness. His neural pathways were intact. Every internal indicator said that Ethan Blackwell should have been sitting up in bed asking for coffee 4 weeks ago. He wasn't. Patricia pulled his full medication audit on a Tuesday afternoon and sat with it for a long time. There was a micro-adjustment in the sedative component of his IV protocol, a dosage rounding decision, on paper, the kind of thing that got initialed and filed and forgotten. But when she traced the adjustment back through the records, it had been introduced 9 days after his admission and maintained consistently, and it was large enough, sustained over weeks, to keep a brain in Ethan's condition from breaking through. Someone with medical knowledge and access to his room had been deliberately maintaining his coma. Patricia needed to tell someone. She could not tell the family, for all she could determine might be the source. She could not go to hospital administration without triggering a process that would alert everyone involved. She needed to tell someone who was inside the situation and not implicated by it, and she had exactly one candidate. She had noticed Clara Monroe over the course of 6 weeks, the woman who appeared in Ethan's corridor at 1 and 2 in the morning and sat in the chair beside his bed with documents in her lap, who was present at every access window, who was not a family member, and had never been introduced at any medical briefing, but who clearly, in some way Patricia couldn't categorize, cared. She stopped her in the corridor one night. "You sit with him," Patricia said. "I've seen you, every night. Who are you to him?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "I'm his wife." Patricia stared at her. "I've never seen you at a family meeting." "They don't invite me," Clara said simply. The statement was so undressed of self-pity that Patricia absorbed it without response. She looked at this woman, the dark circles, the gray uniform, the steadiness, and then she showed her the medication charts. Clara looked at them for a long time. What would happen if we corrected the dosage? "He might wake up," Patricia said. "Then let's correct the dosage," Clara said. Patricia studied her. "Who are you really?" "Someone who made him a promise," Clara said. They began the corrections that night. Victor Blackwell asked for Clara by name on a Thursday morning, which was unusual enough that the request passed through 2 nurses before reaching Margaret, who related to Clara with the expression of a woman choosing to treat something irrelevant as irrelevant. "He has his clear days and his confused days," Margaret said. "Go, keep it brief." Clara went up to the 2nd floor, knocked, and entered. Victor was smaller than he had seemed at the wedding, diminished in his armchair by the cumulative work of Parkinson's disease, which had been taking him apart piece by piece for 3 years. But when Clara closed the door behind her and turned, his eyes found her face with a sharpness that had nothing confused about it. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was stronger than it should have been, the grip of a man gathering something before it slipped away from him permanently. He stared at her face for a long moment, and something moved through his expression, recognition, then grief, then the particular anguish of a man looking at the consequence of a choice he made when he thought he would never have to see it face to face. "James," he said. "James, I'm sorry. I should have you deserved your daughter, James. She doesn't know what I—" "Mr. Blackwell," Clara said carefully, "my name is Clara." He blinked, the confusion receded slightly. "Clara," he whispered, then clearer, "Clara Monroe." He knew exactly who she was. He had always known. "I left something," he said, and his voice had dropped to the register of a man confessing rather than speaking. "Harold has it. You tell Harold case 447. His face crumpled. The Parkinson's moved through him like a wave. "Tell him it's time. It's past time." His hand fell away. His eyes went distant. He had returned to wherever his mind lived now, the vast, careful quiet of a man waiting for the accounting of a life to be finalized. Clara stood in the room for a long time. She looked at the bookshelves, which held 40 years of business records, the archive of everything James Monroe had helped build and been stripped of. She looked at Victor's hands, trembling in his lap. She thought about her father going through those same years in a Bridgeport apartment with nothing, and she felt something that was not quite pity and not quite rage but lived somewhere between the two. She took out her phone, she pressed record. She said quietly and clearly, "Mr. Blackwell, do you know who I am?" His eyes found her again. "Clara Monroe," he said, "James Monroe's daughter." "Yes," she said, "thank you." She stopped the recording. She turned to leave. Nate was in the doorway. He had been there long enough. "What did he say to you?" he asked. "He asked for water," Clara said. She walked past him into the corridor, the recording already uploaded to her private cloud storage, and went back downstairs. Victor Blackwell died on a Wednesday morning, quietly and without drama, in the way of men who have spent their final years gradually releasing their grip on everything they held. His death made the front page of the Wall Street Journal and the business sections of 4 national papers. Blackwell Industries founder dies at 71. Legacy of innovation, questions of succession. The reading of the will was held 6 days later in the estate's main conference room. Margaret arrived first and sat at the head of the table by moving to it without asking, which was how Margaret took all positions. Nate was to her left. Board members and attorneys arranged themselves in descending order of importance down both sides. Clara sat at the far end, in a chair no one had pulled out for her, with her hands folded on the table, and her expression settled into the watchful stillness she had practiced for 8 months. Harold Simmons stood at the front of the room. He was 70 now, gray-haired and carefully erect, and he carried something in his bearing that Clara recognized from her father's letters, the posture of a man who has been holding a wrong in his body for so long it had become structural. His eyes found her once briefly before he opened the file. He read the standard bequests first: staff provisions, charitable endowments, business assets to the corporate trust. The room was still and attentive. Then he reached the inheritance clause and his voice changed register, careful now, deliberate. "My son Ethan James Blackwell inherits the entirety of my personal estate, including all holdings under the Blackwell Family Trust, contingent on his legal marriage. This condition being satisfied as of the date of his marriage to Clara Elizabeth Monroe." Margaret's hand resting on the table closed once, opened again. "In the event that Ethan is medically incapacitated at the time of my passing, management of the Blackwell Family Trust shall vest in his legal spouse, Clara Elizabeth Monroe, as acting trustee, until Ethan resumes legal capacity." The room was silent in the way that rooms are silent when the floor has shifted, and everyone is calculating the new angle. Nate's chair scraped back 1 inch. Harold continued. He reached the secondary provision, and his voice dropped further, the voice of a man arriving at the purpose of his professional life. He slid an envelope down the full length of the mahogany table. It traveled in silence and stopped in front of Clara. She opened it. 1 sentence. Victor's handwriting, deliberate and imprecise with tremor. "Your father's shares were never legally transferred. The original signed documents are in the red lockbox in my private office, drawer 3. File case 4471, B. I am sorry it took me until death to do what was right." Clara folded it, put it in her jacket pocket. She looked up the table, at Margaret, at Nate, at the board members recalibrating in real time. Nate was on his feet. "That is a forgery," he said, and his voice was steady but his neck was red. "My father was not of sound mind." Margaret stood without responding to him. "We'll be retaining legal counsel," she said, and picked up her bag and walked the length of the table. She passed Clara without looking at her and swept the envelope off the table as she went, dropping it on the floor. Clara watched it fall. "Belle, stop everything right now." Nate is on his feet, red-faced, shaking, and Margaret just walked out of that room like she owns the air inside it. She knocked that envelope to the floor right in front of everyone, right in front of Clara. And you need to know what Clara does in the next 30 seconds, because it will change everything. But before we go there, if you are watching this right now and you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because this story is about to go to places you are absolutely not prepared for, and if you miss a single part, you will be completely lost. And drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? We want to know your city, your country. Let us know you are here because this community is watching together and we want to hear from you. Now back to Clara, because she just stood up. Clara picked the envelope up off the floor. She smoothed it against her jacket with one hand, slowly, the way you smooth something that has been deliberately crumpled to make you feel the crumpling. She put it back in her pocket. She looked at Nate, who was still standing at his end of the table, his composure reassembling itself into something that was almost back to his usual pleasantness, but not quite, not all the way. "I'll be filing case 4471B with the federal court by end of business Friday," Clara said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steady for 22 years. "My father's name was James Monroe. He was the co-founder of what is now Blackwell Industries. I have a photograph of the original share transfer document used to defraud him, taken in this house 8 months ago. I have a recorded statement of Victor Blackwell identifying me by name and referencing the case number. I have Harold Simmons's written account, and I now have a written directive from Victor Blackwell himself." She paused for exactly one beat. "I look forward to seeing you in court, Nathaniel." She walked out. In the corridor, around the first corner, she pressed her back against the wall and shook. Not from fear. From the accumulated weight of 22 years of patience finally finding its release valve. She breathed long, pulled in, controlled, the way she had trained herself to breathe in the years she'd spent preparing for exactly this moment. She got it under control in under a minute. Then she called Richard Hale, the attorney she had retained quietly 3 months earlier, with money saved from 18 months of Maid's wages and 2 years of Harvard income before that. "File everything," she said. "Already preparing," Richard said. "Clara, it's going to get very loud." "I know," she said. "Let it." She hung up. Her phone buzzed immediately with an unknown number. She answered. A man's voice, calm, older, deliberate in the way of someone who has been waiting for a call rather than making one. "Mrs. Blackwell, I think we should meet. I have documentation your father left before he died that he wanted you to have. Things even Victor didn't know about." Clara went still. "Who is this?" A pause. "Someone who's been waiting 22 years for you to be in exactly the position you're in right now." The call ended. Clara stood in the corridor of the Blackwell estate with her father's stolen case number in her pocket and an unknown ally on a phone that had just gone silent. And she thought about the note James Monroe had left in a cardboard box for a 12-year-old girl in a too small funeral dress. "Someday someone will find it. I pray it's you." "I found it, Daddy," she said to the empty corridor. Then she went back to work. It was 2:47 a.m. when Ethan Blackwell opened his eyes. The room was the way hospital rooms are at that hour, dim, steady-breathed, the monitors making their quiet argument for his continued presence in the world. Clara was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her cheek resting on her hand, a folder of federal court filings open in her lap. Her hair had come half out of its tie. There was a faint stain on the collar of her jacket that she hadn't been able to get out, dark against the gray. Ethan lay still for a long time, surfacing the way you surface from deep water slowly, with enormous effort, the world arriving in pieces. He catalogued what he could see: hospital room, chair, her. He had heard her voice for weeks. He understood this now from below the surface of consciousness where the medication had kept him. He had been aware without being reachable, present without being able to break through, and her voice had been the thing he followed in the dark, the way you follow light when you can't see your hands. He had heard her tell him everything, about her father, about the plan, about what they had done, and what she had done in response, and what she had promised him in the library on the night of the 9-minute wedding. He turned his head, slowly and with effort, and looked at her properly. She was asleep with a federal filing in her lap. The document visible from his angle read Monroe v. Blackwell Industries, Case 4471B. His father had told him once, one honest conversation, Victor with bourbon and guilt loosened by it. I took something from a man who trusted me, Ethan. A man named Monroe. It's the thing I'll die carrying. He had never named a daughter. He had never named a plan. Ethan looked at this woman. He did not call the nurse. He watched her sleep. When she shifted, her eyes opened and found him looking at her. She came fully awake in a single second. She scrambled from the chair, the folder cascading to the floor, and grabbed the bed rail with both hands and stared at him with the expression of someone whose entire careful world had just rearranged itself. "How long?" he whispered. His voice was barely there. 7 months of silence had taken the sound from it. Clara's hand went for the call button. He moved his own hand slowly, with enormous effort, and covered hers. "Wait," he said. She looked at him. She was crying silently without having chosen to. "How long?" he asked again. 7 months, she whispered. Silence. The monitors blinked. "The medication," he said. "Yes. You figured it out." "Dr. Hughes figured it out. I helped correct it." He was quiet, processing. His eyes moved to the files on the floor and back to her face. "Are you my wife?" Clara's expression did something that took several emotions to complete. "I can explain everything," she said. "I know what you must think. I need you to know I didn't want." "Clara," he said. She stopped. "I heard you," he said. "Last night I heard what you said." The blood left her face entirely. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any." "You brought in a doctor they'd never approved," he said quietly. "You filed the case my father spent 20 years being too afraid to settle. You came to this room every night for 7 months. He turned his hand beneath hers deliberately and held it. "I don't think you're the one who needs to apologize." The door handle moved. Clara pulled her hand back. Ethan's eyes closed. The night nurse, Donna, who Patricia had identified 3 weeks ago as being on Nate's payroll, entered, checked the monitors, looked at Clara. "Very late tonight," she said. "I couldn't sleep," Clara said. Donna left. In the bed, Ethan's finger curled once, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Clara sat back down. They had work to do. They worked like surgeons operating in the dark, precise, quiet, and acutely aware of what a single mistake would cost. Ethan lay still during the day. He performed unconsciousness for the nurses who reported to Nate, for Margaret's twice-weekly visits in which she held his hand and dropped it without tenderness, and for the hospital administrator who periodically reviewed his case on behalf of the family's legal team. The performance cost him something each time, but he maintained it with the discipline of a man who had learned, in the months of darkness, what it meant to be patient when patience was the only instrument available. At night, Clara came. She brought everything. Every photograph, every recording, every document she had accumulated in 8 months of invisible, methodical work. Ethan absorbed it all and cross-referenced it against 7 years of running the company, and what they built together over 4 weeks was the kind of evidence file that made prosecutors request larger offices. The Meridian Holdings account, Ethan said one night, 3 weeks into their collaboration. "Read me the number again." Clara read it from her phone. He was quiet for 6 seconds. "That's Nate's personal account. He opened it in 2019 after my father and I blocked him from the board. He's been routing my estate assets into an account that exists entirely outside Blackwell corporate structure, in his name only." Clara stared at him. "How much?" "At the transfer rate you've been photographing, probably 9 to 12 million over 18 months. She wrote it down. They froze 3 of the accounts the following Tuesday. Clara had the authority as acting trustee. Ethan walked her through the legal process from memory, citing the relevant clauses of the Blackwell trust instrument that he had helped draft at 31 years old, never imagining he would one day be using it from a hospital bed against his own family. Nate noticed the freeze within 48 hours. Clara heard it in his voice when he cornered her in the main hallway of the estate the next morning, blocking her path with his body in the casual territorial way of men who have always found their size useful. He took her phone from her jacket pocket, reached in and took it smoothly, like it was his, and held it above her head. "You've been to the hospital every night for weeks," he said. "Unusual dedication for a woman who married a vegetable." "I made him a promise," Clara said. Nate looked down at her for a long moment. His pleasantness was fully absent now. What remained was older and more honest. "One opportunity, Clara. Take the money. Cover your mother's bills. Leave the estate, leave the name, walk away. Because what comes next, you don't want to be standing in this house when it happens." "Give me my phone," she said. He dropped it, deliberately from height. The screen cracked across the corner. He stepped over it and walked away. Clara picked it up. The recording function was intact. She checked. "Perfect," she said quietly to herself and kept going. That night she arrived at Ethan's room to find a stranger in her chair. Older, silver-haired, briefcase on his knees, with the bearing of a man who had been carrying a specific weight for a very long time and was finally close to setting it down. "Richard Hale," the man said, standing. "I was your father's attorney for the last 2 years of his life." Clara looked at Ethan. "You called him." "I found his number in what you showed me," Ethan said. "Sit down, Clara. There's something about your father you need to hear, and something about who else knew, because it was never just Victor." Richard Hale opened his briefcase, and Clara Monroe's entire understanding of her own story shifted on its axis. The quarterly board meeting of Blackwell Industries fell on the second Tuesday of November, and Nate had been chairing every one of them since March. He had gotten comfortable in that chair the way men get comfortable in spaces that were never meant for them. Gradually, then completely, then with the confident ease of someone who has started to believe that possession and ownership are the same thing. The boardroom doors opened at 9:03 a.m. Ethan Blackwell walked in. He had a cane. His left hand wasn't entirely steady. He was 20 pounds lighter than 7 months ago, and his face carried the particular clarity of someone who had spent an extended period with nothing to do but think. He wore a charcoal suit that his assistant had brought to a private location 2 days earlier, and he wore it the way he wore everything, without concern for whether it made an impression, because he had never needed impressions to precede him. The room registered him in stages. First the board members nearest the door, whose eyes went wide, then the ripple effect moving down the table, chairs shifting, throats clearing, the collective recalibration of a room that had been operating on a set of assumptions that had just been invalidated. Nate's face made a journey that took approximately 4 seconds. Shock, then the rapid calculation of a man who has been caught and is immediately running options, then the reassembly of warmth. He was very good at reassembling warmth. "Ethan," he said, standing. "My God, we didn't even know you were." "No," Ethan said pleasantly. "You didn't." He crossed to the head of the table, stopped behind his chair, and looked at Nate with the patience of a man who had conducted this moment in his mind many times during 7 months of enforced stillness. He said nothing more. He simply waited. The room decided for Nate. He moved. Ethan sat. He looked at the board. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "I'll be resuming control of all corporate and estate functions effective immediately. My legal team will be contacting each of you regarding unauthorized asset transfers conducted during my incapacitation." He opened the folder he had carried in, the one Clara had prepared, the one containing everything, and placed it on the table. This morning, evidence relating to financial fraud and criminal tampering with a medical patient has been submitted to the FBI Financial Crimes Division and the Connecticut State Police. He looked at Nate. "Nathaniel, you have 48 hours to step down from all appointed positions before charges are formally filed." Then he looked at Diana. She was 3 chairs down from Nate, where she had been attending board meetings as his advisor for 2 months. She looked at Ethan the way people look at things they hoped they'd never have to see. He looked at her with a clear, bewildered calm, the expression not of anger, but of a man who has been told something about his own judgment that he needed some time to absorb. "Diana," he said, "thank you for being entirely honest about who you are while I was in a position where I couldn't afford to waste time on it." He opened the meeting. Outside the boardroom, a journalist named Marcus Webb, who had received an anonymous tip that morning, from a source he would later describe only as a woman with extraordinary patience, raised his camera phone as the doors briefly opened. One photograph, Ethan Blackwell, upright, cane in hand, at the head of his own table, published in 40 minutes, everywhere in 2 hours. By nightfall, Nate had leaked to 3 separate tabloids, Maid Marries unconscious billionaire. The story framed it as manipulation, as calculation, as Clara Monroe climbing a ladder over an unconscious man. No mention of the forced signing. No mention of case 4471, no mention of what they had held over her. By nightfall, Clara Monroe was the most publicly hated woman in Greenwich. By nightfall, Ethan had read every word of the coverage, and the look on his face was the quietest and most dangerous thing Clara had ever seen on a person. The Blackwell Monroe Foundation held its inaugural event 6 months later, in the spring, in a ballroom chosen by Clara and approved by Ethan, and the guest list included every person who had ever watched her serve their food in a gray uniform. Before that night came the reckoning, complete and thorough, of the kind that patient people plan and impulsive people never achieve. Nate Blackwell received 3 federal counts of financial fraud and 1 count of conspiracy related to unauthorized medical tampering. His passport, which showed 11 international trips in the preceding 18 months, earned him a flight risk assessment that denied him bail. He waited 62 days for trial in a Bridgeport holding facility, surrounded by men who had no interest in what the Blackwell name meant, and the trial lasted 9 days and ended the way trials end when the evidence has been assembled by a Harvard-trained corporate lawyer over 8 months of invisible work. 7 years. The last photograph published of Nate showed him in a parking lot looking over his shoulder. He looked 2 decades older than his age. Diana Caldwell avoided the conspiracy charge. The evidence was circumstantial, and her lawyers were the best her family's Connecticut banking money could retain. But Ethan's civil litigation team ran for 2 years and cost her family's investment firm 4 of their most significant institutional clients, and Diana was no longer in Greenwich. Her social media had been private for 14 months. No one seemed entirely sure where she had gone. Margaret Blackwell did not go to prison. She retained her personal assets. Victor had separated them with the precision of a man who knew, somewhere underneath everything, that this day would eventually arrive. But the house, the staff, the authority, the invitations to the right dinners, the position at the head of the table at every room she entered, all of it dissolved with the trust. She moved to a condominium in Palm Beach and told everyone who would listen that it was temporary. Ethan did not call her. She did not call him. Some silences are not broken because there is nothing left to say that the preceding decades haven't already said. The night nurse, Donna, lost her license. Harold Simmons gave his testimony with the particular relief of a man who had been carrying a secret for 22 years and was finally allowed to put it down. Clara's father's 18.4% stake in Blackwell Industries, restored by federal court order, made her a major shareholder independent of her marriage. She learned this from Richard Hale's call while standing in a hospital corridor, and she sat down on the floor right there, Rosa sitting beside her, not speaking, just present, and said her father's name to the air. The second wedding was small, 40 people, Rosa in blue, Patricia Hughes, Harold Simmons, lighter than he'd been in decades, Richard Hale, Grace Monroe in the front row in pearl earrings that had belonged to James Monroe's mother, crying from the moment her daughter appeared in the doorway. Clara wore deep blue. Eleanor's color, Ethan told her. He had described the shade once, in his sleep, in those weeks below the surface when he was following her voice like light, and she had chosen it without knowing. Ethan saw her in the doorway and went completely still. The way a person goes still when they've been in motion through something very difficult for a very long time and have finally arrived somewhere safe. The federal judge who officiated, chosen by Clara with quiet, deliberate satisfaction, read the language, both of them standing, both of them present. When it was done, Ethan leaned his forehead briefly against hers and said quietly, "James Monroe's daughter," just that. Her lineage returned to its full dignity. She closed her eyes. At the foundation event that spring, Clara addressed a room full of people who had once watched her serve their appetizers, and she was very good at it, the kind of speaker who makes people feel that what they are hearing has been true longer than they knew. Ethan watched from the side of the room with his coffee and his cane and the specific warmth of a man who had chosen something with his eyes fully open. She stepped down from the podium and crossed to him. He handed her his coffee. She took it, drank it, handed it back. "Happy?" he said. "Extremely," she said. His phone buzzed. He looked down, and the color left his face. An old photograph. 2 young men shaking hands in front of a building. One was Victor Blackwell at 30. The other was a man neither of them recognized. Beneath it, a typed caption. "Victor wasn't the only one who betrayed James Monroe. Ask your husband who his father met with the month before your father was forced out. Ask him about the third partner, the one nobody talks about." Clara read it. She looked at Ethan. "Did you know?" His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing something careful. "No," he said. She studied his face for a long, still moment. Then she took his hand. "Then we find out together," she said. Richard Hale's name lit up her phone. She answered. "Clara," he said, and his voice was shaken in a way she had never heard from him. "I need you in my office tomorrow morning. There's a file your father left, not about Victor, about what James Monroe did with the settlement money he was paid, about who he paid it to, and about what that debt became." He paused. "Your father was not only a victim, Clara. He was also a man who made a choice to protect you from something, and that something has been patient for 22 years. The line went quiet. The ballroom continued around them. Music, champagne, the warm glow of justice that has finally, after a very long time, found its address. Clara and Ethan stood in the middle of it, looking at each other. The story was not over. It was only now truly beginning. Watch out for part 2. If you enjoyed the story so far, please consider subscribing and helping the channel reach 500 subscribers. Every subscription helps the channel grow and makes it possible to bring you the next chapters of this story. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story has reached. Thank you for reading.